So, welcome everybody to a new episode of the Solar Journey. And our today's guest is in Australia. It's Simon Chau. Welcome, Simon. Welcome.
Thank you, Torsten. Nice to be here.
Yeah. So he's in Australia. I'm in Germany. 8 hours difference. First international guest. So thanks a lot for making this happening.
Well, I'm not up at 4 o'clock in the morning like you, so
yeah,
it's fine with me.
So we both haven't met, but we know both Jason Nutter. He's one of the co-founders of the Solar Journey. So he put us in contact, and Jason said that you should be a great guy to talk to when it comes down to the aspect of selling solar. No matter if it's a large power plant or small rooftop systems. Yeah, you know everything about selling solar electricity, operation and maintenance contracts, and how to sell them. But before we all go to these questions or subjects, let me just sketch out the CV of Simon. So so right now he's a business development manager for Canadian Solar, one of the top 10 solar module manufacturers worldwide. He's got a bachelor in banking and finance, so he knows all about the dollars. He worked in banking in industry for 8 years, and he also ran his own show, a multimedia company, for 10 years. And then in 2009 there was a switch to the subject of sustainability, and in 2010 the switch within sustainability to solar. He started to sell solar PV and services in various functions since then. He never left solar. Among other companies, he also worked for the multinational company Flex or Flextronics, so that's a gigantic company. But he also worked for smaller, medium-sized companies selling solar in Australia. So he's a vast interest in the scope of his work in solar. And since 2017, he's been with Canadian Solar, a Canadian-Chinese enterprise, and which is among the top 10 solar module producers worldwide. So again, Simon, thanks for coming onto the show. That was a correct recollection of your CV?
Thank you, Torsten. Yes, that's in summary, and it seemed like forever.
Yeah.
Yes, so like many people, I've changed my career over the course of the journey, as you point out, or solar journey. And my interests initially through school and university was banking, finance, and then I found that was not an industry I particularly enjoyed, but it certainly gave me some great grounding into corporate structure and finance. Yeah. And then from there into totally a different area of multimedia and import-export of components and electronics, and that was quite interesting.
Yeah.
But the switch really came about when I started having children and contemplated what I would like to do and what sort of impact I'd like to have in this world and this life. And, renewable and the transition of renewable energy particularly has been of interest to me for now 10 years. But I guess it was just the questions I had in my own mind was, what would I like to be remembered for, if anything, apart from with my family, is something that I thought became a passion for me, and certainly something that I've enjoyed over the journey. It's a challenging space, but it certainly has I believe I'm in a place where the energy transition and formation through solar and other renewables is really exciting, and I can't see myself ever retiring from this space. I really love this area, and as challenging as it can be called, I'm sure you've heard the term the solar coaster. the journey, the ride that I'm on, and I will continue doing it for as long as I can, I guess. So yeah, here we are. And you mentioned the different types of companies I've worked for. So in that sort of history, there's been a number of smaller companies, Australian-based companies, national companies, and then international companies. And the scope and size of the projects has changed from residential, which is really in terms of size, that's the rooftop of a household. Residential. The market here in Australia is quite large. But I was there very early on, working and talking to clients and helping households benefit with solar, and then moved into commercial and industrial, which is effectively small business, larger business, and again, that was more on the financial side of things to assist them to benefit from renewable energy.
Okay. And commercial, how large are these systems? Sorry, the commercial solar systems. Is it the type of company? Yeah. Is it the type of customer you specify with commercial, or is it the size of the system?
It's strange, when I first started, of course, with residential and then into what's called the SME market, small medium enterprise. That effectively it could be a person working from home to a large factory premises, anybody with a roof effectively that uses energy that operates as a business. So, so the scale of those projects got larger as I gained more experience, and the largest were probably around the shopping centres, which are around 2 megawatt, 2 megawatt thereabouts. Yeah,
2 megawatts already. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's the maximum size, right? And then you also now you also work for selling industrial sized and utility scale systems.
So it's an interesting path, solar. Okay, so we meet many people, we explore different opportunities, and as I sort of went through and progressed in my career, I discovered the large scale solar space, which is effectively solar farms and utility scale. And those type of projects, they range from maybe 100 acres of maybe 10 megawatt, 5 megawatt, up to the largest project we've been involved with is 255 megawatt in Australia.
All right. Yeah.
So those numbers, when I start putting them into context, so there is one site that we're actually on right now, which has in excess 2 million solar modules on the site. The length of the perimeter of the property is around 16 kilometers long, or the fencing, and the scale is huge. If you look at what you could put onto a household roof to the size that I'm talking about at 255 megawatt, it's a big difference. But that's where I've ended up at this stage, and I will say that at this stage because the journey never ends, and I'm actually not selling the project so much as doing the operation and maintenance. So the projects are generally built by the time I'm involved, or they're in construction, and we offer long-term contracts to actually service and operate the sites. So when you think about and just to use the example of a 255 megawatt sized farm, there is around 1,200 hectares of land that needs to be maintained. There is, I'm trying to think the number of inverters on site, probably around 80. 80. That's the RMU. So it's probably in excess of 140 inverters on site. So
what's roughly the investment volume for the 250 megawatt site? How roughly? Do you have a ballpark figure?
Well, I didn't have the real numbers, but I'm assuming it's close to around nearly 300 million.
300 million dollars. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
I guess it's a different market, of course, but in effect, it's still the same process or technology that's being used to generate power.
Yeah.
Solar voltaic panels and modules, converting that energy into electrons and then going through transformers and down the grid, the pipeline, and being injected into the grid. So it's the same principle. It's just on a much larger scale.
Yeah.
But, this journey, I guess, for everyone in this space, if you've been in it long enough, you tend to find out quite a bit about the market. And I've always been interested in trying to learn more. And I find that Australia as a population, we have one of the highest penetrations of solar in the world. 1 in 5 households have solar PV on their roof, which to me is fantastic. And it really shows the benefit of solar to a country like ours, and the potential beyond this is really what I'm excited about too, is where do we go from here? So, I guess the selling is really just the idea that you can communicate an idea to someone so that they can then look at it and say, this is worth my while to consider. And I guess that's why I like solar, is that I'm not offering something that's not tangible. When you talk about an energy system, you're actually talking about a benefit to that person directly. So they look at it and say, well, okay, I can use this energy in my household, in my business. Or in the case of a solar farm, it's actually a financial benefit. They look at it as a long-term asset and how they can turn those new electrons into actual dollars and cents through a power purchase agreement, or in the case of an asset manager or an asset owner, it's the yields and returns per year that they look at.
And the private household, maybe we can switch to the private households. So the penetration now of solar for the private households is now pretty large, you said, compared to other nations in Australia.
Yeah, I haven't really done a comparison on the rest of the world, but my understanding is
1/5 sounds a lot,
Well, you're in a country that has a very high uptake considering the amount of irradiation you have, or sunshine compared to us. It's like, I congratulate Germany for fantastic renewable energy policies, but we have the advantage of actually having sunshine here and turning that into something that's beneficial.
Yeah. I was in Australia in part of my degree in mid-90s, and back then solar wasn't, let's say, it would have been popular. Everybody liked the idea, but it was little, there was a small market, right? And Australia took off only a few years ago. Could you illustrate why suddenly that big change happened now that suddenly Australia is one of the top countries for solar worldwide, particularly also in the private households? How did that change come about? Because when I read about the solar policies in Australia, you would assume the opposite, right? Because it sounds as if from governmental side, it's solar is not so popular, but it seems like the market does the opposite of what the policies is intended to achieve.
Well, there's been a policy in place for quite a long time now. I would suggest it's over 10 years. The renewable energy target was in place through a government, Labor government, may even be the Liberal government before that, but they instigated a renewable energy target and incentivised that target with a rebate, particularly for households. The initial rebate was quite a lot. It was around $8,000 from memory, which was, if you were to install a solar system on your roof, you would receive a government rebate of $8,000.
Okay.
But back then, a 1 kilowatt system or 1.2 kilowatt system was around $10,000 to install onto your roof.
All right.
of which you'd get $8,000 back from the government.
Okay. Wow.
So that was a huge spike.
Yeah.
The problem, of course, is with that sort of number and that sort of size system, it's really not that effective. 1.2 kilowatt power or solar system on your roof has the potential in Australia maybe to generate 4-5 kilowatt hours a day of energy.
Yeah.
And most households in Australia will use around 20.
Yeah.
The other side of this is the state-based governments also incentivized people to take on solar with these things called tariffs, which were feed-in tariffs that if you put onto your roof a solar system and you exported that energy back into the grid, you could get upwards of 60 cents Australian per kilowatt hour for that energy you put back into the grid. That incentive sort of meant that you could potentially, depending on the size of the system, you could pay back very quickly the investment that you made in putting a solar on your roof.
Yeah.
So that was the initial inertia. That was the sort of driving demand for solar at that early stage, as the government had actually put a lot of incentives in place.
Yeah.
Larger scale, they had this thing called the LGC, which is a large generation certificate. And then you had the STCs. So beyond the $8,000, which didn't last for very long, they brought out this thing called the STC, which is a small trading certificate, small generation. So every time you purchased a solar system as a residential customer, you would get a refund from the government, which was in terms of something called an STC rebate. So depending on the size of the solar system, would depend on the number of certificates you'd get, which again subsidised the cost of solar in Australia quite significantly. So over the years, the government has incentivised consumers to take on solar, which meant that, although 1 kilowatt was not hugely effective as a system size, there was quite a lot of people rushing to buy these 1 kilowatt systems because, it was basically free.
Yeah.
It wasn't a lot.
Gigantic incentive, yeah. So I wasn't.
Yeah.
But,
Now we still have some rebates in place. The STC still exist, and on average, after rebates, a solar system of 4 to 5 kilowatts will cost anywhere between $3,000 to $4,000.
Yeah.
In cost to the consumer, and that's 4 to 5 times the size of the original solar systems that were first designed and built and installed.
Yeah.
But they generate quite a lot of energy in the renewable space. I was trying to think if I had any numbers. No, but we do see now that the energy load profile, the energy profile in Australia has changed because of this number of solar systems that have been installed in households.
Yeah.
So we have a duck curve now which shows that during the day there is quite a lot of generation through or reduced demand for energy because of this basically installed solar that's on commercial roofs and households.
Yeah.
It's quite significant.
Yeah. So you have over noon, you have a dip in the
yes
consumption from the grid.
Yeah. So I guess one of the things that it's changed the market in Australia. We have this thing called the National Energy Market or National Electricity Market, which is a platform where people can trade energy. Traditionally, it had been supported by what was called baseload power, so coal-fired power stations generating, quite a lot of energy via a constant number. So their outputs don't really fluctuate that much. It's just that with the uptake of renewables, we've now seen a change in this market where you'll have a spot market that has negative numbers now. So in actual fact, there's just too much production during those periods, particularly on the weekends where you don't have manufacturing or any industry usage really. So you have an actual negative price across Australia on the NEM for energy, wholesale energy.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, I think, you know, I guess I see this as a benefit, but I also see it as a slight hurdle at this stage into how to manage power in the future and how we actually look at solar, how it integrates into the Australian energy market. And, you know, this is probably of interest to me is where will this end up for Australia? I imagine with Germany, you've had similar issues around production and how you manage renewables in terms of the energy loads and profiles. But you know, this is where we I see the exciting part of, or the transformation of energy in Australia and solar as well. So I guess if I was going to bring in another topic, it's around storage, because with this much energy being produced during the daylight hours, the question is, if it's not being used, what is happening and how do we manage this to shift the load towards the end of the day when the energy profile in Australia is that many people, we have this thing called peak demand, which occurs around the hours of 4 till 8 p.m. or thereabouts.
This is why, because everybody's at home and cooking, preparing dinner. Is that the reason?
They come home from work, kids come home from school, everyone rushes to the kitchen, starts cooking, preparing meals. Perhaps people are using electric hot water and doing whatever things they may be doing, washing, dishwashing, whatever.
Hot shower after sports.
Yes, it all happens at that point. And consumers, maybe TVs, games. What I see in terms of the energy transition in Australia is how best to manage that period and how best to actually, you know, there's this thing called energy security, I guess, which is the concern that a lot of conservatives bring up around renewables. What if the sun's not shining? What if the wind's not blowing? What happens then? So really, there is a slight gap in this energy profile that is being addressed with storage, both residential, commercial and utility scale. I think when we get to the point of having cost-effective measures for storage, we'll see that renewables will completely take over the energy transformation. Yeah.
And does it require the right politics for that, to remove legal barriers, or would you say the market will fix it all once the cost for storage just keep going down, then there will be an automatic shift to renewables in general? Or
I feel that using the example of the government incentives that were in place for solar initially, we really need to have the same policies in place for electric energy storage. I was going to say electric vehicles because I feel that that's one where they could really make a difference. Quite a few years ago, I had a number of discussions with our research laboratory lab, CSIRO in Australia. And I'm speaking to a gentleman there who, his main purpose, research scientist, was around battery storage. And he said to me, and this is going back maybe 6 or 7 years ago, he said, the way of the future is electric vehicles. The way to manage electric vehicles is to use them as a stored energy source.
Okay.
So not just an operation for a mode of transport, it's actually their capacity in terms of energy stored. And I'm seeing that's happening now, very early stages. I think Hyundai and Nissan have both introduced vehicles that you can then, provided you have the right inverter technology and battery management systems, you can plug them into your home grid or home network and then use that energy instead of going and drawing on the grid, which I find is perhaps where I see things really working.
Yeah.
For that peak shift or energy demand changing, and really supplementing and giving all the renewables that opportunity to be more secure and say that this is how the future will look. So I feel that's really exciting, that particular technology.
So how would that look like? So you have your car connected to the grid, and over during phases of high solar production, the car would then store the energy, and then later at night they would then also work as a supply of energy, as it's again still connected to, or again connected to the grid after you came home from work, for example. Is that the idea?
Yeah. That's in simplest form. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts to any type of solution, but I guess from a consumer's perspective, it would be that they could use their vehicle to drive to work, and then at their work they'd have an electric charging station there for their electric vehicles, and on their roof of that building that they're in there'd be solar, which would then be used to charge their vehicles. And on return from work back to home, they'd plug their vehicle in, and instead of drawing current from their grid, they would be actually pushing current back in to the grid to supply the demand that they'll have with TVs, heaters, hot water systems, whatever it might be, and cooking, of course, during that period of peak demand. And then at the end of that, they'd either charge what we would call, and there is this thing called time of use in terms of metering that's done in Australia, at a lower rate to recharge the battery in the vehicle, and then, of course, start the process again in the morning.
So that requires some, that requires some smart billing system, right? So it's when you work, your employer might not like to pay your electricity bill. That would be, of course, nice to bring home electricity, not only the shopping.
Well, yeah, look, I think that it's always hard to, it sounds obvious. It sounds like a very simple solution. Of course, there's so many moving parts to it, and who's going to pay for what is probably one of the questions that you're asking. But this is in an ideal format, and really what I'd suggest is that if we had a government that was proactive towards renewable and the transition, and that they could see that electric vehicles as a way for consumers to buy into the idea of storage and reducing carbon emissions, I'd be saying that's the first step. Beyond that, in terms of using it as a storage bank and actually supplying to their home, that will evolve, and I think that evolves through demand. So really what will happen in terms of a market economics, you're really looking at it saying, let's get some vehicles into the Australian population, electric vehicles. Let's build up this demand. Let's build up the infrastructure for charging. Let's have this happen to a point of critical mass where then people say, well, what else can I do with this electric vehicle? The Tesla vehicles are running around with a 90 kilowatt hour, 100 kilowatt hour battery. That's a lot of energy that they've got in their battery. To me, it seems like, well, why wouldn't you offer that as a service or part of your, why wouldn't you multi-use that electricity? And then I've heard all comments about, manufacturers don't want to do that. It's going to be damaging to the battery, blah, blah, blah. I just believe that really it makes a lot of sense. What consumer would want to have two batteries of the same size in their home when one battery could do all?
Totally agree. Just given as an idea, so a Tesla has got a, let's say, 100 kilowatt hour battery. How much energy is that in when you think about the standard Australian household? How long could they live on a Tesla? Let's put it this way.
Well, the average standard home, so a family of 4, is around 25 kilowatt hours per day. So that's 4 days.
4 days,
of
one
stored
Tesla,
energy.
4 days. Yeah.
Yeah,
So that's a lot
yeah,
of storage capacity. Way too much, right? For most, possibly for the standard commute, right? So there's a plenty of
yeah. And I think, look,
extra.
the battery management is the critical part of anything around how batteries are used and what sort of life cycle they have. And um, you know, I guess this is an evolution of energy and transport.
Yeah,
And I think, in these difficult times that we're in, of course, we all have plenty of time to think and contemplate where the future might be after
yeah,
we, see some light at the end of the tunnel. And um, I would like to think that, the brains trust, there's many smart people out there, far smarter than me, that would be sitting there thinking, well, how do we turn this application, or how do we turn what effectively is a very large storage unit into a multi-purpose opportunity?
yeah,
And I feel that, I hear the stories about hydrogen as a fuel cell and as a potential fuel, and the fact that it has zero emissions, and it has some fantastic benefits, and potentially solar in Australia being such a lucky country in terms of irradiation, we could, of course, generate enough energy to produce hydrogen as a potential export of energy. There's all these sort of considerations around hydrogen. But what I see in front of me is that batteries in electric vehicles right now kind of makes sense. It makes a lot more sense than burning diesel or burning any type of fossil fuel.
yeah,
So I guess we may evolve in this technology is forever evolving, and the purpose of solar initially was to allow people an opportunity to have some control and to offer some a way of actually taking back. One of the things that I remember when I was very early into residential solar was that the first question people would ask me is, well, does it work? I guess they were probably sick of hearing salespeople saying, you can get this for free and put it on your roof, and it's going to do this, going to do that. And really, initially with solar in those early days, 1 kilowatt really didn't do a lot for people. The size of the system was way too small. Now that we're down, 8 years, 10 years down the track, we're really looking at systems that are 4 or 5 times larger than this. And then you're looking at something like a car battery for an electric vehicle, which holds that much capacity. And to me, all these numbers are starting to make sense. We're now at a point where you can actually use this. It has value. So I guess, as my wife just walked past.
Welcome. Yeah. Hello.
For me, it's exciting that we've developed the technology to a point where you can put that much on a roof, and the batteries in vehicles are at that capacity. So we're now sort of seeing some things that actually have real opportunity to be used and developed a bit more.
Yeah. So it just
that,
yeah. You go. Sorry. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I'd love to see hydrogen as a format of energy that we could use as well. And I don't think there's any particular technology that's better than others. It's just different, fit for purpose. So, I think it's exciting times ahead. It's just that solar is a lot more integrated as part of the package as opposed to standalone by itself, because it's really not, it doesn't do everything, but it does some things very well.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. Maybe we can. So basically, you see the future solar's as the costs come down, it's going to be used more widely and widely, and electric vehicles could fill the gap in which solar needs due to the fluctuation and bringing energy availability to the rest of the day when there's no sun. You mentioned the hydrogen economy. Is that something which is maybe on the agenda of Australian politics? Because it's like I would assume to a certain extent a big company's business, not that small decentralized format.
I see that there's been conversations had around hydrogen fuel cell development where it's large scale. There's one in WA and there's one in Northern Territory, which the conversations are really by large business. Yeah. We're looking at potential income earners, potential revenue streams that are really to do with export. So we're fortunate in this country that we have a large landmass with a small population and very good renewable factors in terms of energy generation. So solar and wind is fantastic in Australia. Yeah. The idea that you can capture that energy via converting it to hydrogen has been discussed for a number of years, but I think I get the feeling, and this is just a feeling, I can't really put any numbers and figures to it, but that the people that are interested in this space are entrepreneurs that have a long strategy in place, a long game strategy, where they see that if they capture the market early, they could certainly own it. It's building that technology and the cost in that infrastructure. It's quite high. It's quite expensive to develop these type of products. Yeah. I've heard the numbers around 10 gigawatt of solar and wind in the WA plant, which would then be converted into hydrogen, which would then be exported via ship. Now, I'm not an expert in this space, so I'm not really familiar in terms of the cost, but my understanding is that to build these facilities, particularly beyond the solar, the actual hydrogen plant, and then the storage, and then the shipping containers or the ships that need to store this hydrogen, there's billions and billions of dollars that needs to happen before that will take off. So I see that as where the initial concept will take off. I can't see hydrogen as a fuel cell in someone's car at this point. I have seen, there's been some prototypes that ran around California for a little while. I think Honda made them. Yeah.
But because of the costs or of the, let's say, risks of acceptance or by the users, or
I think it's more my understanding was that in order for hydrogen to be transported, it needs to be kept at a fairly low temperature and it needs a fairly high pressure. Yeah. And to do that in terms of cost, particularly in terms of a small scale into a car or anything of that nature, is quite high. Now, I don't know if it's ever going to be cost effective. Perhaps if we get to scale in terms of numbers and people say that this is the way of the future, and automotive companies invest billions and whatever to develop that technology to a commercial level, I just feel that electric vehicles are a lot further down the track in terms of development as opposed to hydrogen. And really where hydrogen fits right now is in the large scale of stored energy, potential export market for Australia on that basis.
Yeah. I mean, also in Germany, there's the government just released their hydrogen strategy. Actually, what do you call them? Ministers, secretaries of state, I guess that's what you would call them in the US. There was a big press release, big event talking about the national hydrogen strategy, and it's interesting that there's a lot more, let's say, press awareness for hydrogen than for solar, right? It's like people might be against solar, but they are pro hydrogen, and it's it's interesting. I haven't understood it myself why this is the case, right? Because they should harmonize, and if yeah, hydrogen is then also quite often used as the a way better solution than the battery storage, right? Which I haven't understood myself either, right? Because as you said, standard battery technology, lithium-based technology is already a far way down the track in terms of cost and proven usability, right? So I do assume also that there's other players now involved who want to get their safe stake in the future energy industry, right? I mean,
it's always going to happen.
Yeah, so in a way, it's a big threat for some players, right? I mean, you have these big coal companies, I would assume, and uranium mining companies in Australia. So you wonder where they end up if all goes solar, right? Everybody's got his solar system on the roof, and then there's the car manufacturers. So where do the standard utilities and mining companies end up, right? Where do they go, right? Is that,
of course, there's all these other interests
that
involved.
These let's say conventional energy stakeholders push for hydrogen because it is this big business, capex business, which they can handle, but not the, let's say, private households or small and medium enterprises?
Well, I guess what I am seeing, and this is on a larger scale, is companies like Shell, which you would have obviously heard of before, have moved towards becoming energy providers and energy owners. They're looking at a vertical chain, so they're looking at it from no longer just one particular type of energy, it's all sources of energy. For them, it's to own the energy platforms, and then they can say, well, we can deliver, transport, produce any type of energy. My thoughts will be, it'll be someone like that type of company that will look at hydrogen and how the best to make it cost effective. We do have fossil fuel companies and fossil industry who are hugely influential in terms of government decisions. They have influenced the governments to a point where investment in solar has actually reduced significantly in the large-scale solar side. Before COVID-19, there was already a significant drop in investment in large-scale solar in Australia. I think I recall seeing a number of somewhere around 60% drop in investment dollars in Australia for large-scale solar. And that's in no part, it's certainly due to the influences of fossil fuel lobbyists that have encouraged the government to look towards boosting and really taking away any initiatives and incentives for solar investment in Australia. So I guess the one heartening thing I have out of all this and the struggles that we have in this industry in Australia is that the energy transition is occurring on the household perspective. People believe it, they understand it. So the general population of Australia is very much on board with the idea of renewable energy. Unfortunately, the larger companies that have very deep pockets and an industry they need to protect continue to hinder what is effectively something that will have to happen. You know, there's a lot of emotive positions people take, because particularly when you talk about climate change and the impact of carbon emissions on climate change, that kind of cloud what is actually happening in the world. And, you know, if anything, this period of lockdown that we've occurred and the reduction in air travel and an overall cleaning of the environment, I guess in some ways is what we could see if we were all transitioned to renewable as an energy source. My only fear is that everyone will want to get back to normal as soon as possible once this lockdown is finished,
So,
and
yeah,
we'll start seeing, the air's covered in pollution, effectively.
yeah,
So I guess from my perspective, that is part of the reason why I will continue being in this space for as long as I can, is that the message needs to get there, and we need to continue until transition has occurred, and we're no longer using fossil fuels.
yeah,
So in some ways, I'm happy that a company like Shell, who has acquired a number of energy providers in Australia and purchased solar developers, they've done a number of things actively seeking to become a multi-stream revenue or energy source and provider, and because to me that's showing that they see the future.
yeah,
and the future is not fossil fuels.
yeah. I mean, they've released studies a few years ago where they clearly say within a few decades, few years, solar will be larger than oil, right? So they do, and this is their own data, that's their own study. So they do clearly see that study. But at the same time, I've been in PV for, since 1993, and Shell was even a producer of solar cells, at least once, if not multiple times. So critics say, that goes already into conspiracy theory, say they are in for the wrong reasons, right? So it's. I would definitely say also the energy business. There's plenty space for all, and any money is welcome to finance and push the energy transition. But at the same time, as you mentioned, there's many people who want to save their own stakes, the old way of doing things, right? So it's definitely going to be interesting, right? So I'm super happy to see, of course, Shell on board, but there's many say I'm scared of that. They are in for the wrong, right? You mentioned once previously the drop of new solar parks of 60% on a, I guess, annual basis, and that was due to some. How did that happen? Did change in legislation? Did some actual laws were changed, or just how?
Right. Well, this is quite it takes a little bit of answering, so I hope you don't mind. You have to indulge me with this one. But essentially, when I talk about 60% drop or 60% reduction in investments, it's project developers who were out seeking funding for projects that they've been looking to establish in Australia. We have, I guess, the difficulties with energy transition is that the model that occurred before was traditionally based on large power plants, coal-fired power plants, with an infrastructure to support those power plants and then transmit that energy through a grid. On the eastern seaboard of Australia, we have this thing called the National Energy Market, which has the longest single grid infrastructure anywhere in the world. It's I can't remember the kilometres of grid infrastructure. It's massive. But highlighted in that was these coal-fired power stations essentially were plugged into this grid to generate the energy. Since the development of renewable energy and wind and solar has come on board, and what we have now is we have dispersed energy storage or energy producing plants across Australia, which they need to find a way to inject into the grid. And because the grid is quite antiquated, its design was not built around this new form of generation. We have a regulator, a number of different regulators and authorities and bodies in Australia that manage this grid. Within that, we have these restrictions. So what essentially is happening is solar developer is going out there, acquiring land, saying this would be great to put a 100 megawatt farm here. They get a lease long-term lease with the landowner. Then they go through what's called a development approval process, where they'll go through local council, design, engineering. They'll go through, apply to AEMO for connection. So there's a lot of work in this, thousands of hours and many dollars, engineering, design, all that work to effectively build a plant.
Yeah.
Now, because this infrastructure is is quite outdated, many of these plots of land that the developers have found are not in. They may have a connection point which is to a high voltage line that's not far from there to reduce the cost of connection, but the actual strength of that grid or that line is questionable at best. And we're having this problem in one area called the Western Murray region of Victoria, New South Wales. So it's on the border. The transmission lines that actually transport that energy have quite a lot of redundant. They're not strong. And what's happened is that we have a bottleneck of legislation and delays in connection for those particular projects. So one of the plants that we're dealing with, there's 5 plants, just to give you an example, there's 5 plants in this region that had their they were curtailed to 50% of their production because AEMO had to do some studies to actually work out how to support those plants after they'd already been built. So which really impacted the investors, because now they were looking at a model which, instead of having 100% production, they're at 50%. They've got no choice. They have to wait until they got approval. And it happened on Friday. They could now produce 100% of their energy. Problem with this, and that's just one side of it, okay? So that's the actual logistics and the actual grid infrastructure and getting into allowing you to connect into this grid. We also have a government that does not incentivise investment in solar. They spend billions of dollars in rebates and government initiatives to encourage coal or fossil fuel.
But there's still high investors, government or public money going into coal.
Yeah, or there may be tax offsets or any number of ways to encourage investment in this space, because they see it. For them, they have a vested interest with the lobbyists and the money that they get given to them. The other side of this is this grid being what it is. The infrastructure is not strong enough to support these type of farms on a consistent level.
Yeah.
They also have this thing called MLF, which is marginal loss factors. So you build a farm 500 kilometres away from the nearest large energy user, for instance. And maybe that's a small town or a medium-sized town. There is a calculation that the regulators had used to say that if you produced 100% at your site, by the time it reached that point of destination, the MLF could be up to 20% loss. So you've modelled your business on 100% production or 90% production, whatever it might be. You then have to factor in that whatever this arbitrary number is that is being calculated, you then have to assume that that's all you will earn, or the amount of energy you'll be able to redeem is 80% of the total. So these are the factors that really encourage people not to look at investing in Australia. The other side of this is we've had, in the large-scale side of the business or industry, there's been a number of EPCs. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with an EPC is, an engineering procurement company. So construction. They do the project. So a developer may get the funding and the permissions and the land, then they'll engage a contract with an EPC to build it. The EPCs, in the last few years, a number of them have gone out of business simply because the margins weren't there and they didn't cost or didn't quote the project correctly. And one of the risks that they were taking on was the connection. So in order to get their payments at the end, they'd have to say that they could get the project connected. So the actual connection of the project is quite a significant process, and because of the poor infrastructure, you will find that these sites, some of the sites, and there's a number of sites that have been completed that are not yet connected in Australia. So
that's a technical issue or an administration issue to get these large projects connected?
It's a technical issue.
Yeah.
It's a technical issue. It's getting permission through the regulators to say that, yes, you will be able to be connected. So AEMO need to do their testing to allow you to actually connect to the grid. But that happens at the end of the project when you construct it, because you can model all you want, but until you've actually built the site and then actually turned it on, you still don't have permission to actually generate or export to the grid.
Okay.
So that risk has seen us a couple of EPCs go to the wall because they actually, until they've connected, they're losing money.
Yeah. But so AEMO delays the process, the technical connection, or what's? So I mean, I'm sure you could technically understand it's like I don't know, 10 megawatts. You want to connect, you know precisely what the kind of voltage and currents you've got and what kind of inverter you require, transformers. So where's the risk? Where's the, if it's a technical issue, what's the problem? It's a delay by the administration, or
well, just to use the example of the 5 sites that they were curtailed to 50%. So these sites have been built and were operating at full capacity, and then AEMO, in their wisdom, realised that the load on the grid was creating some stability issues, and they immediately curtailed those 5 sites. What's had to happen since then is that the 5 sites, for fortuitous reasons, had the one inverter manufacturer on those 5 sites, which is SMA.
Yeah.
SMA did some modelling for, and it's taken months, did some modelling for AEMO to enable them to see that they could actually manage the sites and reduce this risk that they saw in stability in the grid, for them to say, yes, we'll turn you back on. This modelling that occurs for connection, even though they've done all the modelling beforehand, when they go through what's called GPS, this modelling for connection is the one that is the stumbling block. And there's no way anybody could have modelled for what AEMO did and curtailed those 5 sites for 50%. That's because, unfortunately, there's a lack of communication between developers, AEMO, the grid, who's putting what into where, how many people are actually injecting energy into that particular zone or region. So all those factors create a lot of confusion and doubt. So if you're an investor and someone said to you, okay, well, you could invest something in Europe, 100 megawatt.
Yeah.
You could get a PPA for this amount and the connection would be stable. Or you could invest in Australia.
But you don't know if you can connect. Yeah.
You don't know if you can connect. Your rates are fairly low for PPAs. They're not fantastic here. And there's high risk that you won't even get your full return on your asset.
Okay.
I mean, it's just, that's the thing. It's a global market. Solar is a global market. So,
and the money goes where it's you have a low risk, right? Yeah.
but I think this brings me back to a point that you raised earlier about, you know, these type of large companies getting involved in renewables, if that's a good thing or a bad thing. And really, the problem, or when I put my finance hat on, I understand that it's not about renewables. It's got nothing to do with renewables. It's about the opportunity, the LCOE, the levelized cost of energy,
Yeah.
but the profit. The risk and the profit is what businesses of that nature look for.
Yeah.
So for them to turn around and say, well, we're now energy agnostic, we'll take on any sort of energy.
Yeah.
No, they won't take on any sort of energy. They'll take on energy sources that make them money. And that's what we have to deal with. I don't think that's a bad thing in the context that as a marketplace, by getting people like the companies like Shell and the like involved in investing in renewables, it affirms for them that this is an area of revenue, and it sort of encourages that type of growth and investment. If I had a magic wand, I would be looking in Australia to change the structure around energy markets, allowing a lot more investment and managing it a lot better, and having a stronger government actually managing it.
Yeah.
Because this is an opportunity that we're actually delaying in our transition.
Yeah. So for Australia, you would really see the need of a change in policies, pulling down admin barriers, creating the mindset in these authorities to bring solar in Australia to the next level. Is that correct?
Well, at a high level, of course, you know, I mean, I don't have anything except an opinion. So,
sure. I mean, yeah, it's,
you know, from my perspective.
But you have a long, good experience, hands-on experience on what the solar energy market is like in Australia. So
I feel like the energy transition is something that, if it was taken on a national level by a government body that actually wasn't politically driven and was able to have the power to generate or to make change, that would be a huge thing for Australia. And I see, and perhaps I'm misreading things that are happening, but I think with this virus that's occurred with COVID-19, you hear a lot of reports about people saying globalization doesn't work. And this is what's happened because of globalization. And, you know, the world is a different place now. I look at it and think, well, if that's the case, food security, energy security for your country would be as important as border control, because you would then be thinking, well, we need to be self-sufficient. We need to be making sure we generate enough energy and we have enough internally to make our country work. And if it sort of sounds socialist or something, I guess, but when I say that there should be a government body that is in control of this at a level that is non-political, and it's more about those essential securities, we would see change happen a lot faster.
I mean,
what I see.
Sorry. I mean, Australia could easily be self-sufficient, right? Energy-wise, right? With that much of sunlight and wind, right? And
absolutely.
Technology.
I really see that we could be, you know, if the borders are opened again, I could see us being an exporter of energy. We have that much resources, natural resources here in Australia, that our position as an energy provider or an energy positive in the world would be quite strong. But what I see happening, and I think it's really more consumer driven, is that we have a high uptake of solar on households and a high uptake in commercial, and you know, international investment into solar in large scale. What I would like to see is that we have the same push into electric vehicles, for transport.
Yeah.
And I would really like to see government incentives in that.
Yeah.
That would drive, I guess, what I was talking about in terms of our use of energy storage.
Yeah.
And, you know, I feel that's an easier path to take than trying to convince a government that's so anti climate change. I think if they were just to incentivize a little bit on electric vehicles, we'd be in a much better place.
Yeah, excellent. But this is now really, I mean, the logical next question for me would be, the politicians are only the ones who are elected by the people, right? So if all the Australians are so pro, or many are pro solar, why do you have this kind of policies and policymakers?
Yeah,
it's a tough question, I know, but it just sits there, this question, and so
look, I think
bring it out. Yeah.
I think the reason why, and it's been reviewed a number of times, I guess the last election was won by the Liberals when they didn't think they would win the election. It was a lot to do with people's perception of the opposition party and the risk of taking on such a wide and varied policy change. But I think they narrowed it down in terms of the reason why the Liberals got in was more about the marketing of a perception, nothing to do with climate change. The vote was not about climate change. In the end, it was about people's pensions and super funds and things that might be impacted by this Labor Party, the opposition coming in. So it was really decided by something that had nothing to do with climate change. I think if you asked people in Australia on a Vox Pop type, interview, you would find that particularly now we had these bushfires throughout November, December, which impacted huge amounts of land. And I'm not sure if you saw it in Europe, but
yeah, everybody, it was in the press, on TV, like every night.
Yeah, and living through it, and only from a metropolitan city, you had this dense smoke in the air continually, which it had an effect on people in Australia that we wanted to see something done about it. There was early warnings about the bushfire occurring and the mismanagement of policies around how to minimise fire risk, also the funding around fires and bushfires, and the question came up, well, why have we had the hottest summer and why have we had droughts? And it was all related back to climate change. A lot of that came back and said, well, this is the result of increased temperatures across the globe. We're having much higher, hotter summers and higher risk in bushfires.
Yeah.
Now, had we not had COVID-19 come through in the last, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, we may have seen a very different outlook in terms of what was happening and the momentum around change for climate change in Australia, because I felt like it was not the management of that in terms of government was a little bit poor, the representation around how they managed the bushfires. And I feel that there was a little bit of negative press about that, and it could have provided some impetus to change climate at that point. But I honestly think that our biggest issue in this country, and it comes back to the initial question, why do we still have the same government in place, is that as much as we care about our climate and our country, we also care about what's in our wallet and what someone is prepared to do to take our money from our wallet or our quality of life and how it could be impacted. So the decision to vote in Liberal as opposed to the opposition was more about financial risk.
Yeah.
And I feel that if we had our time again and we had a different outcome, perhaps we'd still be here.
Yeah.
You know, in this space, COVID-19, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like right now it's not really relevant that we have a negative government in place. It's that beyond this government, and we've still got another 2 years of them in power, we have to keep, we just have to keep going. You know, I can't vote them out because there won't be another election for another 2 years.
Yeah. And do I understand you correctly? So you think that there was a positive impetus from the bushfires towards solar, but then COVID-19, you could possibly, this is a pushback of, let's say, a broader move to renewables in Australia? Because I mean, this is actually also being discussed in Germany and I guess all over the place, that now possibly more people are bothered about bringing up the economy, do the conventional thing rather than to keep caring about climate change.
Look, Torsten, I feel that I don't think we've ever had this economic situation occur globally. And, you know, people do worry about their security in terms of income and, you know, whether they'll have enough food on the table for their family. And this current government has certainly provided quite a lot of resources around supporting people through this period. They have a timeline, 6 months. But what happens after 6 months in terms of a return of some sort of economy and how we actually get to a point where people are comfortable again? I guess the only thing I see happening right now is that simply by the fact that we're in lockdown and people aren't doing the same stuff that they were doing before in terms of consumerism and driving and transport and overseas holidays, and a lot of that won't come back that quickly. So we still have opportunities for climate change to be to have some benefit right now. In terms of solar, I think that our investment strategies and long-term investment into solar farms, that won't change anytime soon. I think that'll be at least another 18 months or 2 years before you'll see some, we'll need some government assistance with that.
Yeah, cool.
You know, I think you're right, Torsten, that this is really not the time for people to concentrate on climate as much as we would like them to, and to concentrate on solar. Everyone will be racing towards how do we fix what we have a problem with.
Yeah.
That's generally the economy.
Yeah. I mean,
it's frustrating.
It's frustrating. Yeah, there's a few voices who say actually the real political decision would be now because there will be a lot of money poured into the let's say economy, whatever that is, government money, and you might as well spend it on something which has a future. So you might as well spend that money into the energy transition rather than supporting the, let's say, conventional way of doing things. But I guess we will see one day, and that's yet to come, right? So it's an open race. So
there's no answer for that, right? So this is the thing. There is no right answer. There is no wrong answer. And it is unfortunately a situation where we're all stumbling through it, and there's no set time either in terms of, okay, let's just assume that they ease restrictions now. Is there a risk of a second wave of infection? Yes, there is a risk. Will that mean they'll lock down again? And how can we afford this? The question I hear from a number of different people is, well, we're spending all this money to stimulate or maintain people in jobs or not jobs, or what's going to happen after this? How is this? I mean, I don't think there'll be a lot of money in the bank, in the government's kitty at the end of it. I think they'll be thinking, right, well, I've spent, in Australia, it's about $180 billion, maybe even more, on incentive packages, job seeker and job keeper, for the long term, for those that have been immediately unemployed through this virus. Beyond that, I have not heard anything from any government person saying, well, we're going to do this to rebuild the economy. It's not about rebuilding the economy now. It's just keeping people afloat. So there's not financial stress to the point where, we have a massive collapse of industry and the economy. So I agree with you. If we encouraged investment, it's not even actually putting government money into investment.
It would be private money, right? Yeah.
Private money, providing them with opportunities to build plants into areas where we all understand that the coal-fired plants have got a life cycle which I think is between 30 to 50 years, that they're all being decommissioned. Problem we have is that everyone's saying 30 years is too long to continue with coal-fired generated plants in the world. CO2 emissions. Australia's, and the statistic that can be interpreted in a number of ways is that we only have 1.5% of the total emissions in the world coming out of Australia. On a per capita basis, that's really too high. And then if you include the exports of fossil fuels, coal, to China and other countries, it's another 3%. It's a lot for a small nation of 25 million people. So in an ideal world, get rid of coal. Get rid of coal-fired power stations. Do something else. It doesn't have to be solar. I'd love it to be solar. It could be wind. It could be hydrogen. It could be a number.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
But I don't think anyone's thinking about it right now, except you and me having this chat.
You need to start a party. I don't know.
But look, I'm glad we've had this discussion around different areas of solar in Australia. I don't think it's that dissimilar from other countries.
No.
Transition.
It's exactly the same situation over here. It's in Germany, and I guess in most economies. Yeah.
We have our own regulations that make it difficult, and certainly have impacted the investment in large scale. But the benefit is that as consumers and businesses see the benefit, and it's a financial benefit. When I look at solar for for a manufacturer or anyone that has energy requirements, their paybacks on solar is less than 4 years, which I think is quite a reasonable return, considering you don't get anything for putting money in a bank for zero interest or whatever. It's better than doing that. And the government has put incentives in place for tax write-offs for businesses to encourage them to purchase things, and I would be encouraging people to purchase solar because they can write it off straight away.
Excellent. Hey Simon, So the good part, and I guess you also try to do that, is there's basically no technical barrier for solar and renewables at this stage, right? It's super attractive. The technology works. If the conditions are right, we can see big growth in the usage of solar. You made an interesting point with the electric vehicles being as an intermediate storage vehicle in a literal sense. Yeah, and we all don't know how COVID is impacting the economy and social life in general, but in particular also how the renewables will move forward after, or yeah, with COVID or after COVID. And this is all yet to be seen. I took so many notes where I wanted to touch ground with like conventional solar stuff, like what's a PPA and what is OEM and what are the challenges there. But we moved in a pretty cool, interesting area. Nonetheless, maybe you're interested in covering these grounds in a later session, maybe a few weeks, months down the road, and then we will see also how the
Austin, if you want me to talk again, I'm happy to.
How the COVID-19 situation turned out, yeah.
It's not hard. You just tell me what to. You ask a question, I just keep talking. So if I've taken up too much of your time, sorry about that.
No. All cool, yeah. Hey, Simon, thanks a lot for your thoughts and ideas and opinions. Very much appreciated.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for inviting me, and look forward to speaking again when, perhaps when this is over and we're at the other end and you ask me the same questions, I can give you a different answer.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, it's been a pleasure, Simon. Thanks a lot.
All right, no problems. Thank you, Torsten.
Yeah, stay safe.
Okay.
Bye-bye.